I was sitting in the break room at work, half watching the muted TV in the corner, when I started scrolling through Instagram. My thumb was on autopilot, flicking past pictures of vacation sunsets, dogs in Halloween costumes, and the usual look at my latte art posts. Then I saw it. Christina's face. She was in Chicago, supposedly for a regional training her company had been talking about for weeks. She told me it was all business, presentations, networking dinners, long days stuck in conference rooms. She'd even made a joke before she left about how I should expect her to come back with 100 branded pens and an aversion to hotel coffee. But the photo in front of me didn't match that story. The bar behind her was dim, all amber light and glossy wood. The kind of place you'd go to relax, not to discuss quarterly goals. She was wearing a dark green dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in loose waves that looked like they belonged in an ad campaign. And standing next to her, his arms snug around her waist, was Zach. I knew Zach, at least from stories. He was the younger guy at her office, sharp dresser, the one who always seemed to be the punchline in her funny work stories. In the picture, he had this casual, almost possessive touch, like he'd done it 100 times. It wasn't some stiff, posed photo. It was comfortable, familiar. Christina held a glass of wine in one hand, tilted slightly toward him. And then there was the caption, "With my real partner, red heart clinking glasses." It was short, but my eyes kept landing on the words real partner. It didn't help that the comments section was full of people chiming in, co-workers, mutual friends, even her cousin, writing things like, "Haha, you too," and "Dream team," with laughing emojis and heart symbols. For a moment, I just stared at it, feeling that odd mix of confusion and adrenaline, like my body was warning me something was off before my brain could fully catch up. I scrolled back up, rereading the caption like maybe it would make more sense the second time. Didn't. That night, when I called her, I brought it up gently. I didn't want to sound accusatory, partly because I didn't want to start a fight, and partly because I needed to hear how she'd explain it. She laughed almost immediately, the kind of laugh you use when you're waving something away. "Oh my God, Thomas, it's just a joke," she said. "Zach's my project partner. You know the big account we've been working on for months? Everyone calls us that. You're overthinking it." Her tone was light, dismissive. She made it sound like the only unusual thing here was that I'd read it differently than she intended. It looked kind of close, that's all," I said. "Close?" She repeated, and then laughed again, softer this time. "We've been living out of hotel conference rooms all week. Trust me, the last thing I'm doing is having fun with Zach. He's probably in the room next door, eating a sad sandwich in bed." I wanted to believe her. I told myself I was overreacting, that my reaction was coming from the fact she was away, that I missed her. But the picture kept coming back to me. The casual way his hand rested on her waist. The little tilt of her body toward him. The caption, 3 harmless-looking words with an entirely different weight depending on how you read them. The thing was, Christina's always been good with words. She knows how to defuse tension, how to make something sound harmless even if it's not. She once talked a hotel clerk into upgrading our room after I was the one who complained. By the end of the conversation, he was smiling and apologizing to her. That same SK*LL was in her voice now, smoothing everything over, making me feel like the issue was my perspective, not her actions. By the time we hung up, I could almost hear the unspoken message. "You're making something out of nothing." Still, after the call, I scrolled back to the photo again. I told myself it was just curiosity, but the truth was I was looking for something. Some detail I'd missed that would either make it innocent or confirm the knot in my gut. But it stayed exactly the same. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how quickly she'd answered, how prepared her explanation sounded. The more I replayed the call, the more I felt like I'd walked straight into a pre-written script. I told myself to let it go. People have inside jokes. They post stupid captions. Maybe real partner was just harmless office humor. But the image stayed with me like a splinter under the skin. It wasn't sharp enough to cause real pain, not yet. But I couldn't stop touching it, pressing on it, testing the sore spot. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the first moment a crack formed in the version of our marriage I thought I knew. Memories started unspooling the second I put my phone down, like someone tugged on a thread and the whole sweater of "we're fine" began to come apart. I told myself 100 tiny stories to make things feel normal. Now those stories lined up like dominoes, and one tap sent them sliding. The bathroom calls were the first to knock over. For months, maybe longer, Christina had taken late-night calls behind the locked door, fan humming like white noise to a secret I wasn't invited to. At first I joked about it. "Writing your memoir in there?" I'd ask, and she'd crack the door an inch, press a finger to her lips, and smile with that practiced warmth that cancels further questions. After a while I stopped asking. That's the thing about boundaries, you can respect them or they can train you. I told myself it was respect. Then there was the location tracking. We started sharing locations after an ice storm stranded her on I-94. It made both of us feel safer. Lately, her dot would gray out at convenient moments, then reappear somewhere that didn't match the dinner she described. "Battery saver," she'd say, tossing the explanation over her shoulder like car keys. "Chicago chews through phones." Sometimes the dot would pop up near the river when she'd said she was in the loop. Sometimes it would reappear at the hotel 2 hours after she claimed she'd turned in. I told myself conferences run late. I told myself cities bend distance the way heat bends air. Her wardrobe shifted in a way I only understood in hindsight. Christina has always dressed better than me, but over the last few months it turned aspirational. Silk that didn't wrinkle, shoes that made the tile click, new earrings that caught the light like tiny planets. When I asked, she said, "We did a clothing swap at work," as if her friends just happened to share her measurements, her style, and the budget of a small country. The tags were new. The tailoring was precise. "Perks of having stylish friends," she added, kissing my cheek so quickly the question never landed. Evenings turned into a duet of screen glow and half-smiles. We'd sit on the couch with a show droning in the background while her phone lit the room every few seconds. She always angled it away, not dramatically, just enough that I caught the message without seeing the messages. When I asked who it was, she'd shrug. "Work, or group chat, or you know how the client is." She wasn't lying exactly. There were memes, there were logistics, there were emojis that meant nothing and everything. Sometimes she'd even tilt the phone back, so I could see a harmless joke from someone named K. I laughed when she laughed, and the moment would move on like a cloud clearing the sun. Little smells tell big truths. One February night her scarf carried a clean, peppery cologne I didn't recognize. Not heavy, nothing you'd clock across a room. It lived in the fabric like a remembered touch. She laughed when I mentioned it. "Probably from the rideshare driver," she said, or "People spray those sample cards in stores." Or, "You know the guys at the office, clouds of it." The answers came so fast they elbowed each other, and I felt foolish for noticing at all. I tossed the scarf over the chair and tried to forget that it made our hallway smell like someone else. Travel magnified everything. Her messages arrived in neat cadences. Latte art at 8:07. Lanyard selfie at 12:22. Skyline blur at 9:15. If I texted offbeat, "Where are you now?" the reply took longer and arrived with 2 extra exclamation points and a heart, as if enthusiasm could do the job of detail. Once, when I grabbed her suitcase, I found a hotel key card tucked into the side pocket. Not the logo of her company's preferred chain. Different teal, different font. "Overflow property," she said easily. They split the team between hotels. It slid into her wallet like a coin disappearing into a magician's palm. Work events offered their own footnotes. At last year's holiday party, Zach introduced himself like he already knew me. "So you're the famous Thomas," he said, palm heavy on my shoulder, eyes not leaving Christina's face. She flashed him a grin I'd filed under proud then. Now it read like complicity. Later, her team pulled her onto the dance floor. A loose circle of hands and half spins while I stood near the buffet and pretended I liked the shrimp. When she spun back to me, breathless and flushed, she leaned close to say something, and then her phone buzzed, and the moment rerouted. We had a dumb argument about the shared calendar this spring. I'd asked her to invite me to a strategy dinner so I wouldn't plan over it. She teased me for being the logistics czar but added it anyway, Location TBD. An hour later, the event was gone. "We moved it to lunch," she said when I noticed. "You don't have to babysit my calendar." She was right. I didn't have to. I stopped checking and felt, briefly, like I'd earned a merit badge in trust. Merit badges are made of thread. They burn. Even Daisy, our rescue mutt who loves everyone, started waiting by the back door instead of the front when Christina texted, "On my way." Daisy would trot to me, glance toward the yard, then sit like she was expecting a second arrival. It's easy to laugh at people who say their pets can tell when something's wrong. It's less easy when your dog learns new patterns faster than you do. There were midnight porch calls to the Asia team, her breath fogging the cold while she murmured into her phone with a softness I didn't recognize. There were Saturdays rebranded as heads-down days that ended with a last-minute drinks with the vendor. They flew in, can't be rude. There was a spare tote by the door that clinked faintly when she grabbed it. Makeup, mini perfume, charger. A toothbrush, she said, was for coffee breath emergencies. There were receipts that didn't match the per diem and meetings that never made it into the minutes. Each one was small enough to ignore. Together they formed a sentence I didn't want to read. And still, I wanted to be good. I wanted to be the man who doesn't police, who believes the best version first. I'd repeat bromides to myself like prayers. People are entitled to private thoughts. Busy seasons make messy calendars. You don't need to read every message to be secure. That last one sounded noble until I realized I wasn't secure. I was simply choosing not to know. Choosing not to know is a softer word for fear. The memory that hurts the most is the smallest. We were at a neighborhood bar, a nothing Wednesday night. The server asked if we were celebrating anything. Christina answered too fast. "Work win," she said, raising her glass. "Our team crushed a deadline." The pronoun stuck. She meant the company, obviously. Of course she did. But the word rolled around my mouth like a pebble I couldn't swallow. On the walk home, she slipped her hand into my coat pocket instead of taking my hand, and I let the gesture pass like weather. After the Instagram post, my brain replayed these clips on a loop, each one annotated with a new caption. Maybe, maybe not. I tried to dismiss them, to be fair, to extend the benefit of the doubt like an open tab. But doubt, once it has a seat at your table, starts ordering for the group. It chooses the wine, tells the stories. It laughs at the right moments. And when you look up, you realize you've spent the whole night talking to it instead of the person across from you. I didn't confront Christina that night. I brushed my teeth, set the alarm, and lay awake while the house ticked and settled. Somewhere past midnight, a plane droned overhead, climbing to whatever came next. I stared at the ceiling and thought about bridges, the kind you drive across in fog because turning around feels riskier than moving forward. I'd always called that trust. Lying there, phone face down on the nightstand, I finally admitted what it really was. It was deflection, hers and mine. A week passed after that Instagram photo, but my mind didn't move on. If anything, it kept looping back, stitching that image of Christina and Zach into every small, strange detail from the months before. I told myself I needed proof before I even thought about confrontation. Proof meant it was real. Proof meant I wasn't just the jealous husband reading too much into things. The proof came from an unexpected place. It was a Tuesday night. I was home early, half watching some forgettable TV show while nursing a beer. My phone buzzed. A message from Mike, an old college friend who now lived in Chicago. We weren't in regular contact, so my first thought was that it must be something important. "Hey man, random question. Christina's in Chicago this week, right?" My stomach tightened instantly. I typed back, "Yeah, work trip. Why?" His reply came fast. "I didn't want to overstep, but I think I saw her last night, with some guy. Not sure if I should say more." I called him immediately. His voice was careful, like someone walking through a room full of broken glass. He told me he'd been out with coworkers at a rooftop bar near the conference center. He'd spotted Christina at the far end, not with a group, but alone with a man. Tall, dark hair, well-dressed. They were leaning in close, laughing the way people do when there's already a comfort between them. "Thomas," he said, lowering his voice. It wasn't just the bar. I saw them later. Same guy. They went into one of the hotels across the street together. Same room. I wish I was wrong, man. I wanted to shut it down, to say he must have been mistaken, but Mike had no reason to invent this. And then he added the part that made my chest feel like it was caving in. They came out the next morning. Together. She was carrying coffee and a bag that looked like breakfast for two. It was like someone had taken a match to every excuse I'd been carefully stockpiling. Mike apologized again, said he debated telling me, but in the end, he couldn't stay silent. I thanked him, or at least I think I did. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the muted TV, the moving shapes on the screen making no sense at all. By Thursday, the story was bigger than just what Mike had seen. Another call came, this time from a contact I knew through Christina's company. We weren't close, but we'd crossed paths at a few holiday events. Her voice was brisk, almost businesslike, but I could hear the unease underneath. Thomas, I don't know how to say this, but there's going to be fallout. She explained that someone at the Chicago office had passed along surveillance stills, grainy black and white captures from the hotel hallway. Christina and Zach, side by side, entering a room late at night. Another set showing them leaving the next morning. There were also candid sh*ts from inside a downtown bar, both during lunch hours and later in the evening. Zach's hand on her knee in one, her head on his shoulder in another. All of it was now in the hands of her company's HR and legal department. They're looking at policy violations, she said. Zach's her subordinate, and the trip was company-funded. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know before it blows up. I thanked her, though the words felt mechanical. When we hung up, I stayed in the kitchen for a long time, phone still in my hand, staring at the floor. There was no rush of rage, no dramatic outburst, just a slow, sinking weight. This was confirmation. No captions to misread. No plausible deniability. That night, I couldn't stop picturing it. Christina unlocking a hotel room door. Zach stepping in behind her. The sound of the latch sliding into place. It hit me how carefully she'd constructed the lie. The regional training had been the perfect cover. A trip that made sense on paper, that came with name tags and itineraries she could wave in my face if I asked. I thought about the calls I'd made to her that week, the way she always seemed to answer from a quiet hallway or outside on the street. Her voice light, her words quick. I remembered the selfies she'd sent. Always alone, always in safe, public spaces. Never once the shadow of another person in the frame. I didn't tell her I knew. Not yet. That night, lying in bed, I kept my breathing even, pretending to be asleep when she texted me from the hotel. Long day. Miss you, Red Heart. I stared at the screen until it went black. The next morning, I called my bank. I woke up on Friday with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The kind of clarity that doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives like a cold wind through an open door. The confirmations from Mike and my contact at Christina's company had burned away any remaining fog. There was no room left for maybe. No more waiting for her to explain. No more giving her the benefit of the doubt so she could hang herself with more lies. She was still in Chicago. That was my window. The first thing I did was stand in the middle of our bedroom and look around. Not at the furniture or the framed prints she'd picked out years ago, but at the space itself. I imagined her walking back into this room on Sunday night like nothing had happened, dropping her bag, kissing me on the cheek, maybe curling up next to me in bed. I pictured myself letting it happen, smiling through clenched teeth until I exploded weeks later. No, I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First, the locksmith. I told him I needed all the exterior locks replaced before the day was over. No, I didn't care about the extra charge for same-day service. He could hear in my voice that this wasn't just about a misplaced key. Next, the bank. I'd been meaning to set up separate accounts for a while. One for emergencies, one to keep certain savings untouched. But life had a way of pushing that to the bottom of the list. Now it was the first item. The woman on the line was polite, efficient, and didn't ask questions beyond what was necessary. I transferred the balance from our joint checking into my new account, leaving only enough to cover the auto payments for utilities and the mortgage until the end of the month. Then I called the credit card company. I'd been the primary on all our shared cards, which meant I could close them with a few keystrokes. The rep tried to upsell me on individual accounts, but I cut him off. Just close the joint ones, I said. Today, I pictured Christina in some boutique after work, swiping a card on the company dime for herself and on mine for whatever she wanted. That mental image made the hold music almost soothing. By noon, I had my own checking, savings, and credit lines. Christina had none of mine. Insurance was next. Health, car, homeowners. I removed her from every policy. The health plan was straightforward. The rep noted the qualifying life event as change in household composition and said the new coverage would kick in immediately. The car insurance rep was more curious. Is she getting her own policy? He asked. I said I didn't know. I didn't say I didn't care. Once the accounts were secure, I walked through the house with a pair of empty boxes, pulling down her frame degrees, the little ceramic dish she kept on the hall table for her keys, the stack of magazines she never read but insisted on displaying. In the kitchen, I emptied her half of the pantry shelf, protein bars, the fancy teas she claimed to need to decompress, the jar of imported honey that cost more than my first cell phone bill. I didn't throw anything away. Not yet. The guest house out back had always been a kind of glorified storage space. It was insulated, had its own bathroom, even a small kitchenette. We'd used it when friends visited or when one of us needed to work through the night without keeping the other awake. Now it was going to be Christina's landing zone. She could sleep there, eat there, exist there until she figured out her next move, just not under the same roof. By mid-afternoon, 2 movers from a local company were hauling her suitcases, her boxes, her shoe racks, and a surprising number of decorative throw pillows into the guest house. I didn't give them an explanation. They didn't ask for one. The bedroom looked almost alien without her things. No jewelry on the dresser, no curling iron cord trailing from the vanity, no perfume bottles catching the afternoon light. It was cleaner. It was quieter. It was mine. When the locksmith arrived, I stayed out front and watched him work, the tumblers clicking as he swapped out the old brass for new steel. He gave me 3 keys and asked if I wanted more copies. "3's fine," I said. I slipped one into my pocket, one onto my spare ring, and hid the third in the garage. I didn't bother labeling them. Once the locks were done, I sat at the dining table with a manila folder and a pen. Inside were the divorce papers I'd had drafted that morning. My lawyer had worked fast, probably sensing from my tone that there was no room for drawn-out negotiations. The asset division was straightforward. I'd keep the house, the car, and the majority of the savings. She'd keep her personal belongings and whatever remained in the joint account I'd intentionally left behind. No alimony. No pretense of irreconcilable differences that blurred the cause. The paperwork spelled it out plainly. Infidelity. I signed every page, then slid the folder shut. On the bed in the guest house, I placed the folder next to a neatly typed inventory of what I'd moved, along with instructions for transferring her mail to a different address. On top of the papers, I left a single, unwrapped house key, the one for the guest house only. For a long time, I stood in the doorway, looking at the bed. It was strange how quiet it felt in there. Even though the furniture was the same, even though Christina's clothes hung in the closet just a few steps away, the silence wasn't oppressive. It was neutral. Before heading back to the main house, I took a photo of the key and the folder on the bed. I didn't know why. Maybe to remind myself later that this wasn't a dream, that I'd actually drawn a line and stepped over it. By the time the sun started to set, the house was locked. My accounts were mine alone, and Christina's world had been reduced to a detached unit in the backyard. She could walk through the main house if she needed to, but only under my watch. I ordered takeout and ate it at the kitchen counter, the television silent in the other room. I expected to feel hollow, maybe even guilty. Instead, I felt like someone had taken a weight off my shoulders that I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Somewhere in Chicago, she was probably having her last drink of the night, maybe leaning into Zach the way she had in that Instagram post. Maybe she'd even send me another text, "Miss you," as if the word could erase everything. If she did, I wouldn't answer. Not anymore. Christina flew back on Sunday afternoon. I knew her return flight number because I'd booked it myself weeks earlier, back when I still thought regional training meant PowerPoints and networking lunches. I didn't bother going to the airport. I didn't even text to say I'd be home. She didn't know anything had changed yet. I imagined her stepping off the plane, checking her phone for my usual, "How was the flight?" message, finding nothing. Maybe she'd think I was busy. Maybe she'd think I was upset about something trivial. The real surprise was waiting in her calendar for Monday morning. I'd kept track of her itinerary for months, not because I was suspicious at the time, but because Christina had a habit of double-booking herself. According to her synced work calendar, still visible to me because she'd never revoked the shared access, she had a project meeting at 9 a.m. Monday with her department director. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that I knew exactly who else would be in the room. Sunday night, she didn't come into the main house. I saw the lights click on in the guest house and heard the muted hum of her suitcase wheels on the path. She didn't try to unlock the front door. Probably figured I'd gone to bed. I stayed in the kitchen, out of sight, listening to her move around in her temporary space. At one point, I thought I heard her open the folder on the bed. No knock on my door. No shouting. Just silence. The next morning, I was up before dawn. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and thought about the chain reaction that was about to start. My contact at her company had promised she wouldn't give me specifics, but she'd hinted enough. The HR meeting wasn't about any project. They had the photos, the surveillance footage, even timestamps showing she and Zach were absent from official sessions during the trip. Company policy on manager-subordinate relationships was strict. Add in that the trip was funded by the company and the hotel room charges went through corporate billing. They didn't need much else. At 8:30, Christina walked up the path from the guest house, dressed in one of her expensive blazers, hair pulled into a sharp bun, phone in hand. She didn't look toward the kitchen window. If she noticed the new locks on the main house, she didn't mention it. I didn't say a word as she left. Later, the same contact sent me a short, almost clinical text. "It's happening now." I pictured her walking into the conference room expecting a normal meeting, maybe even thinking she could steer it back in her favor. I knew Christina. She'd start with charm, downplay everything, frame the relationship as harmless. But charm doesn't erase a time-stamped still of you holding your subordinate's hand in a bar during work hours. It doesn't explain an overnight stay charged to the company's card when the conference schedule shows you both free at the same time. From what I heard later, they had a small stack of printed evidence on the table when she arrived. The Instagram photo, the bar snapsh *TS, the hallway footage. One of them was even enlarged on a tablet screen. Zach leaning against the hotel doorframe while she unlocked it. The meeting didn't last long. She left the office by noon. Her company email account was locked before she even got home. The security fob she used to enter the building was deactivated in real time. I imagine the moment it stopped working. Her pushing it against the reader, waiting for the familiar green light, getting red instead. By the end of the day, her name had disappeared from the company's Slack directory. Group chats went quiet. A couple of her work friends unfollowed her on Instagram. One of them, a woman she used to brunch with every other Sunday, deleted her entirely. She came back to the guest house just before dark. Her shoulders were slumped, the set of her mouth tight. She didn't knock. She didn't come to the main house. Around 8 that night, I got a string of texts from mutual friends. People who didn't know the full story but had seen the smoke. "Hey, I heard Christina's not at her job anymore. Is everything okay?" I ignored most of them. I didn't see the point in explaining. The ones who needed to know already knew. By Tuesday, the whispers had spread beyond her professional circle. Our small network of mutual acquaintances, neighbors, friends of friends, people from the gym, suddenly went quiet on her social media. I saw her follower count drop by a dozen in one day. 2 couples we'd vacationed with unfollowed her entirely. Someone had clearly connected the dots. She stayed in the guest house like it was a bunker. The blinds stayed drawn. The porch light stayed off. If she left, I didn't hear her. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't gloating. But there was a certain justice in watching the story she'd built for herself. Confident professional, loyal wife, polished image, collapse under the weight of her own actions. I didn't make a single phone call to cause it. All I did was stop covering for her. That week, I started sleeping better. The silence in the main house wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. I could cook dinner without wondering if she'd come home late smelling like someone else's cologne. I could leave my phone face up on the counter without the impulse to guard it, as if lies were contagious. The last piece of the collapse came on Thursday, when she tried to post a photo of Daisy, our dog, on her Instagram story. The caption was some variation of, "At least I have you, Red Heart." Within minutes, one of her former co-workers replied with a single sentence. "Maybe you should have thought about that before." She deleted the story, then set her account to private. She didn't try to talk to me about any of it. Not yet. Maybe she was waiting until the dust settled. Maybe she still thought she could explain her way back into the life she'd lost. But the thing about a collapse is that once it starts, you can't rebuild from the same pieces. They're cracked, scattered, no longer fit the way they used to, and I was in no hurry to help her gather them. By the time the court date arrived, Christina and I had barely spoken beyond the occasional logistical question about the dog, mail, or utilities. Everything else passed through lawyers. It was cleaner that way. I'd stopped thinking of her as my wife weeks earlier. By then, she was just the other party in a case file with my name on it. The morning of the hearing, I was up early. I put on a navy suit that had been gathering dust since the last wedding we'd attended together. 2 summers ago, before Chicago, before Zach, before I started reading every text notification like it might be a grenade. I shaved, drank black coffee, and drove to the courthouse in a calm, steady silence. My attorney, Barnes, was already there when I arrived. He had the kind of calm that comes from doing this 1,000 times. Measured voice, crisp notes, the quiet assurance of a man who knows exactly how the day will go. We'd met twice in person before today, once to gather evidence and once to rehearse the questions I might be asked. I'd handed over everything. The Instagram screenshot *T, the text from my friend in Chicago, the security footage stills, and the email from her coworker confirming the violations of company policy. Barnes kept reminding me that, in our state, evidence of infidelity still mattered. Judges don't always care, he'd said. But when you've got hard proof, it changes the conversation. Christina arrived 5 minutes before we were called in. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in size, but in presence. She wore a muted gray dress and no jewelry, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Zach wasn't with her. I wondered if he was still in the picture or if he'd cut his losses once the job and the travel perks disappeared. We didn't speak. She sat across the hallway, scrolling her phone with a kind of rigid focus, as if each swipe of her thumb could erase the reason we were there. When our case was called, we walked into the small, fluorescent-lit courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 50s with an expression that gave away nothing. Barnes laid out our position cleanly. That Christina's actions, both the affair and the breach of professional conduct, were the primary cause of the breakdown of our marriage. He didn't embellish. He didn't have to. He slid the folder across to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. From where I sat, I could see the first page, the still from the hotel hallway camera, date and time stamped. Christina's eyes flicked toward it, then down at the table. Her lawyer, a man I'd never met until that morning, tried to soften it. He framed it as an ill-advised personal decision made during a period of marital strain. He emphasized that Christina had been under stress, that the marriage had already been faltering. The judge listened without much reaction. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. "Your Honor," I said, "I didn't come here to attack her character. I came here because I believe actions have consequences. I trusted her for years. She broke that trust in a way that can't be repaired." Barnes took over again, outlining the division of assets we were requesting. I would keep the house, the car, and the majority of the savings account. No alimony. She would retain her personal belongings and the funds left in the joint account. Christina's lawyer pushed for spousal support, arguing that she'd lost her job in part because of the publicity surrounding our divorce. Barnes didn't flinch. The loss of employment, he said evenly, was the direct result of her own conduct, which is documented in the evidence before the court. My client should not bear financial responsibility for the consequences of those choices. The judge reviewed the documents for what felt like an hour but was probably 15 minutes. When she finally spoke, her tone was clear, measured. She acknowledged that while marriages can fail for many reasons, the evidence here demonstrates that the petitioner's actions constituted a breach of both marital trust and professional integrity. Her ruling mirrored exactly what we'd asked for. I kept the house, the car, and the bulk of our savings. No alimony was awarded. Christina would take only her personal property and the remainder of the joint account. I felt no triumph, just finality. Christina didn't look at me as the judge moved on to the next case. Her lawyer gathered their papers, murmuring something I couldn't hear. Barnes touched my arm lightly, a subtle signal that it was time to leave. Outside the courthouse, the air felt sharp and clean. Barnes shook my hand and said, "You did well in there. Not every client can stay that composed." "Composure's all I've got left," I said. On the walk to my car, I glanced back once. Christina was standing near the steps, her phone to her ear, face turned away. Maybe she was calling a friend. Maybe Zach. Maybe no one. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't replay the hearing in my head. It was over, and replaying it wouldn't change the outcome. The papers would be finalized in a matter of days. The marriage was legally dead. When I pulled into the driveway, Daisy met me at the gate, tail wagging, completely oblivious to the fact that one chapter of my life had just been sealed shut. I crouched down, scratched behind her ears, and for the first time in months, I felt the smallest flicker of relief. Christina was no longer my responsibility.